This is the copy of the record that I was on. It still has the little white thing on the front, and this is reputedly to be the last record that Gene Vincent ever made. And I played violin on this one, a song called Dance Colinda. I showed up for the studio for this particular album early so I could meet him, and it was at Dave Hassinger's studio in Los Angeles on Selma Avenue, and I was excited to work with Dave Hassinger, the engineer, because he had done a number of things like Satisfaction for the Stones, some of the great records, and he was a great rock and roll producer. So I got there early, and I wanted to be there when nobody else was around, so I could at least shake hands with the guy and say hi to him. So when he was when I walked into the studio, there was nobody around. Dave was in the booth fiddling with some dials, and I walked into the recording studio area, and there was a guy standing over in the corner who looked like the janitor, and he was wearing these dark pants and dark shirt, and it was the kind you get at Sears that people wear and he had a black belt and black shoes, and I was wondering where Gene Vincent was, and I kept looking around and all of a sudden this guy turns around at me, and it was Gene, and it looked like he had aged a number of years. He looked like he was closer to 50 than in his mid-30s, and I was pretty shocked at his demeanor, but I also realized who it was and went up to him and shook his hand and say hi, and I introduced myself and said, hello, I'm going to be on your record, and I'm going to be playing with this one. And that was my first impression of him, especially since earlier on in my life I had sort of gotten to know him through the movie Girl Can't Help It that I had seen when I was 12 years old. That made a big impression on me. And that was the first time I ever remember really seeing Gene Vincent move in the flesh. I had his records, and I'd seen pictures of him, but he totally captivated me, and he became one of my major idols. And of course, Cliff Gallup, the guitar player, was another one of those guys that. So as a young man and a young musician trying to learn how to play, Gene Vincent became it was a big issue for me. So I felt really fortunate and blessed to be able to play on this record. The session went really well. They were very happy with what I did. The band on the session was primarily the members of the Sir Douglas Quintet without Doug Somm. He had previously left the band before that. And I got a chance to stick around and watch the sessions go, and he was impeccable. I mean, he was really good when he was on mic, and he sang great, and seemed to be a really, what's the right word? He seemed to be in charge of the situation. He wasn't the least bit being led by anybody else. It was his session, and he had a real great command of what was going on.
Like in the studio.
His mood was actually quite good in the studio. He seemed to be very up and very ecstatic about being there, and I think that in this particular stage of his life, he seemed to be it seemed like he wanted to expand himself away from what everybody thought he was, and that he wasn't just a rockabilly artist. He liked country music, and he was one of the songs that we did. The one I played on was actually a Cajun tune, and so. He was really good, I think, but I had a chance to meet with him later afterwards at a party after we had finished the record, and we sat a long time in Tom Ayers' kitchen talking for a long time, and I just got this feeling about him that he was kind of a sad guy, and there was something very melancholy about his demeanor, and he was obviously very much in love with his wife. I mean, it seemed like he was being motivated more by her than he was maybe by his own career at that particular time. It's hard for me to say. I didn't know him well enough to be able to say that, but there was a very, very kind of a dark tone that kind of surrounded him, and my assumption at the time was that it was probably residual effects from the accident with Eddie Cochran, and where he got killed, and the fact that you could tell that he was in pain from his foot injury that never seemed to heal quite right, and he limped, and he seemed to be sort of resolute about a certain kind of thing, but this sort of tonality that surrounded him was very, I wouldn't say spooky, but it was very melancholy. Well, I think the the thing that the major aspect of the '60s, that I mean, I was in a band called the Kaleidoscope, and we were a psychedelic band, and the music that we did some blues and we did some Middle Eastern and that kind of stuff. We were kind of known as the world beat kind of band, and I think because of his recognition as a rockabilly artist, even though he was much broader than that, I think that he probably could have liked the music of that particular time, but in terms of him trying to fit his music into the '60s, or maybe people being able to kind of make that fit into the general attitude of the time, it was disparaging. I don't think it was a really good mix necessarily for the people that were, because music was very open in that time, but that particular time, Elvis and Everly Brothers and all these guys, they all had, that wasn't a good time for them either, you know. And I think that that it was just one of those things where music took a different turn, and some people that were really doing really good, it's just like all the people that when the Beatles hit, all of a sudden these guys that had hits before that just disappeared, and so I think that I don't think that his music was necessarily unfit for the '60s, but as far as him being able to fit into the '60s mentality, I think it would have been probably a difficult thing for him, and I think that's probably why he was probably bigger outside the United States than he was inside the United States ever. I think he's probably got a bigger following in Europe and other parts of the world than he does in the U.S. even today. I don't know why necessarily. I think because maybe it was because of Elvis, maybe it was because Eddie Cochran, maybe it was, you know, he was, and I think he was kind of a self-effacing personality. He wasn't one of those guys that gave me the impression that he was out there to win you over. He more did it with his talent than with his attitude and vibration. He was exciting and all that kind of stuff, but he had a sweetness about him and a niceness about him, and I don't think he was really a heavy confrontational kind of personality. And I think Elvis was much more of a showman and much more of a person who turned it on when he went on stage and stuff. And I think that the moodiness and the kind of melancholy I was talking about before were things that maybe got in his way, that maybe kept him from being like as big of an artist that he possibly could have. It certainly wasn't about his talent. I don't think it had anything to do with his talent. But some people just never quite make it the way we always want them to, and he's one of those guys that I think in retrospect now, when people listen to his records are timeless. I mean, it's not like they don't hang up or hang in there. I think they really do. And the fact that I own a copy of the movie The Girl Can't Help It, and I just turn it on periodically just so I can see him. So it's worth it. It's worth it to buy that, to buy a videotape of that or a DVD of that if nothing else. I wasn't the bit surprised when I heard that he had died, because there was some kind of a tone that let me believe that he wasn't maybe not going to be around that long. I don't think I thought that so much about him, but I felt more that he had a very he looked like he had a hard life, and he looked like he had aged very fast, and the fact that I was only a few years younger than him and he looked maybe another 15 years, 20 years older than me at the time, led me to believe that he was working against the clock to some degree. And so, like I said, I wasn't particularly surprised when I heard that he had passed away, and it made a lot of sense to me. And I don't know, maybe it was you know, I've told a couple people that he might have even died of a broken heart. There was something about him that sort of gave that impression that he never sort of realized the potential that he actually had inside of him, and those of us who really cared a great deal about him can probably feel that for him. And I know that people like Jeff Beck and a lot of great musicians and stuff have been very much affected by him, as I was, and he'll always be a part of me and a part of my music. And I feel that I feel very fortunate and lucky to have ever been able to play with him at the time that I did, because it turned out that was really his last record that I played on.